Thank you so much for joining and making this work. Real quick recap for anyone listening now or in the future. Food system sustainability is so important, and it's can be hard to make the connection between why does sustainability matter? Why do food systems matter? Why do we really need to eat locally and support our farmers? It sounds like a quaint idea, and yeah, it's great, but why is it actually critical to the future of our planet and the future of our health? So this is the connection that I'm trying to make. And you have so much more to offer to this conversation that it just makes sense to let you talk about this. So Dr. Currey is an ethnoecologist specializing in biodiversity in small-scale agricultural systems or home gardens. She has master's and PhDs, and I'm going to mess it up, but I will say you founded the program of sustainable food systems at Prescott College and run it. And so I will dive right in first with what is a sustainable food system? What does that even mean?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the invitation, Nichole. And again, I apologize for our technical glitches, but I get excited anytime anybody reaches out to talk about sustainable food systems, because we get really focused sometimes on just the individual foods that we eat or individual businesses, and sometimes we forget about how all the different pieces need to work together in order to have sustainable, food systems be sustainable. So maybe I'll start just to make sure we're all on the same page about what a food system is. So essentially,
good point. Yeah.
A food system encompasses everything that has to do with keeping us nourished. And sometimes you'll see in definitions they say fed. Well, anyone can eat, right? But the nourishment in terms of the kinds of foods that are going to help support our wellness, our own individual health and wellness, in addition to the wellness of the planet, healthy ecosystems, healthy organisms, that's what we're looking at. So it's everything from where does our food come from originally? And then, where did those seeds come from? And are we respecting the rights of the people who thought up, realized that that was something edible and that this could grow there? And so sometimes we have a bad habit in the West of taking seeds from other places and then patenting them. So everything from the origins to the production, how do we grow it? Is what we're adding into the systems through herbicides or pesticides. Are those harming us? Are they harming, the bees that provide the pollination that we need in order to get the fruits? So we look at that. We also look at distribution systems and processing systems. So essentially, we have enough food to feed all the people on the planet right now. We do not have a production problem, which is a narrative that we hear, the green revolution, we need to help, struggling farmers grow more. That's not the issue. It's we have justice issues associated with challenges in equal and equitable access to food, and then our distribution channels. So I think many of the folks who joined us today might have experienced some of those food shortages that happened when COVID hit a year ago and everyone panicked. Well, guess what? That was a symptom of some of the challenges of our distribution systems. It was the Costco members who were able to load up, not, our smaller, mid and lower income households who don't have access to those transportation networks to be hauling, those bulk buys, for example. But it also has to do with the marketing and of foodstuffs, right? We think we have choices, but we're really just inundated inundated with certain kinds of information. And so, that's some of the things that we look at when we look at food system sustainability. But then we also are concerned about, our dietary patterns and our eating habits, and how many of those things we actually have choices about. Because again, there are lots of health disparities and lots of economic disparities that make it harder for us to have, choices that feel free when it comes to our food. And then, of course, we have to look at food waste. Hopefully, there's not too much of that, and hopefully that's something we can be working towards a reduction of. But so all of those pieces are things that people who study food systems are interested in. And then we have these other overarching issues like the policies that exist in the United States, for example, and globally, about social support networks, health networks, the kinds of messaging that we're getting from healthcare professionals even. And then we're also, of course, concerned about economic justice, social justice issues, and climate justice issues. We're not all affected the same way. So that's what we study.
So much to unpack there. Yes. So what does a sustainable food system look like today?
Yeah, well, I wish there were more examples to point to, and that's one of the challenges. And that's what keeps me coming to work with motivation every single day, and working with all my graduate students and others to try to build more sustainable food systems. The reality is that I can talk about elements as opposed to, specific examples, because some places will have, ecological sustainability. So, we can be producing in, for example, very biodiverse. So lots of different kinds of plants and lots of varieties of different plants, biodiverse agricultural production systems. But then maybe we have economic injustices, or maybe we have interethnic conflict that prevent people from being to, have health and well-being. And so really we're looking for things where people are healthy and the ecology is doing well, so the ecosystems are healthy. And some of the ways that we can try to ensure that are things like biodiversity. So we know that when we have lots of different species growing together, even if we think about our national anthems, the amber waves of grain, it's all one crop as far as the eye can see. That's not what produces healthy soils. That's not what then supports lots of different beneficial insects and our pollinators. And that's not what supports us to be healthy, gobs of bread. So if we can have a more diversified ecosystem, then we also have more diverse foodstuffs to be able to choose from. And so that's one of the elements of a more sustainable food system. We also need to pay attention to micronutrients. And so this is our focus for food systems in terms of, health. A lot of the food security programs and projects globally are calorie based. So you'll hear about, trying to reach a 2,100 calorie diet. Well, those calories harm us if they are not micronutrient dense. And this is one of our challenges here in the United States. We actually have very high malnutrition rates, but we also have about a third of our adult population have obesity. And, the thing to pay attention to here is that disjunct. We can have an over provision of high caloric foods and an under provision of very micronutrient dense foods. And these are things like our fruits and our vegetables and our whole grains, our pulses. So these are some of the things that we want to be concerned about. So sustainable diets are diets that have low ecological impacts, but high impact in ensuring nutrition security. So that's what we're focusing on when we're thinking about sustainable food systems.
I like that. And so I want to back up just one minute.
Yeah.
When you talked about what a sustainable food system does look like today, and the first factor was a biodiverse ecology, that makes me think of California, particularly Southern California, where we might have a biodiverse ecology, but I forget how you described the lack of the socioeconomic parity.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can we unpack that a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. So I think part of maybe the best way to approach this is to think about this in terms of scale. So, my area of expertise is in small scale agriculture. So in the US, we would call these front yards and backyards. And so if we think about within kind of that scale, then this is folks producing their own foods. And you can think about, if you're fortunate to be in a house, you can think about your own front yard and backyard and think about, well, what would that look like if it was all food? And we'd want trees, and then we'd want our vegetables, right? Fruit trees. And then we'd also want some of our berry bushes, and then we'd want our veggies, and we'd want veggies to go throughout the season. So in order to have all of that, we would need to have a biodiverse system. And then we'd need to have all the pollinators coming in, and yes, even some of the pest insects, because the birds have to eat something. And we'd want all of those elements in there. Now, if we move up in scale, then we can think about, okay, then what does my neighborhood look like? And then if we move up in scale from there, we can think about, oh gosh, what does this part of town look like? And then we move up in scale and we think about, well, what about all those agricultural areas that are outside of my town? That's the model that we have more in the US. Agriculture is out there in the country, and we live here in suburbia or urbia. So, if we think about all of those different scales, we need diversity in every single one of those different scales. What we know is that, farmers who are closer to urban areas tend to be more biodiverse because they have access to all of those eaters who are living in the more urban areas. And so you can start setting up this very nice symbiosis between biodiverse agricultural systems and then also a more direct linkage to your eaters. And we know.
So you're specifically saying that demand is impacting this chain as much, if not more, than supply.
Yes. And if we could just demand more, if we could demand more of that. So if we could demand more of foods that are foods grown in a way that were not bioaccumulating pesticide and herbicide residues in our body. And so one way that we can demand that, and this would be an element of a sustainable food system, it would be to buy organic, for example, or buy directly from a grower that you trust, that you have, there are costs that are associated with organic certification that can be barriers to access for some growers. But if you know them and they know you and they care about you and you care about them, then odds are that you are going to be getting food produced in a way that you can feel good about consuming. And then also if nobody's buying the kale, then why is that farmer going to keep growing it? So if we're not asking for buckwheat, for example, which is amazing for the soil, really high protein content, high fiber content, great micronutrients, but if we're not cooking with it, and if nobody wants to buy it, nobody's asking for it, then the farmers aren't going to grow it. So it's it's a two-way relationship here. And it's nice when that's built on shared care and concern for one another.
Yeah. Dr. Currey, where are we lacking in the U.S.?
Oh, where to begin?
Putting you on the spot.
No, that's okay. So we're lacking in a few key areas, and I think, for some people this may surprise them in my answer, but it really is more in the economic justice and social justice side of things. So one of the ways that we're lacking is around, for example, housing security. So we know that people who have housing security, they also tend to have food security. Why? Because they have a place to be able to store their food, refrigerators, and cooking. We can cook our own food. We know that the research shows that when we're all cooking our own meals, we tend to make healthier choices. But we've forgotten how to cook in the United States, and we've really forgotten how to grow. Most folks don't know, like, where does milk come from? The grocery store, right? So, we have some work to do in terms of relearning how to cook, living wages for folks so that they can have equal access to healthier choices. And then along with that, cooking is maybe there's a better way to phrase this, but training our children to like foods that are good for us. There's research that shows that children need to be exposed 17 times to a foodstuff in order to acquire a taste for it. And so it's one of those things of just that, there's a lot of programs in our schools actually that are trying to introduce, you have a veggie of the week and then a veggie of a month program where you're trying to expose kids to this. But if our kids, and actually a lot of us adults are like this too, it's like, what, Swiss chard, what? So, yeah. So it's really some of those exposures. And then it's also about really making conscious decisions about who we're purchasing from. And so all things being equal, if you buy organic, then there's regulations, there's an inspection system associated with that. So you can feel more confident that you're not getting the glyphosate residues, pesticide residues. And so you are actually enhancing biodiversity by buying organic. You're also conserving soils by buying organic. So all things being equal, make that choice. And then all other things being equal, if you have an opportunity to buy from somebody that is closer in geography, then you're supporting those distribution networks. You're supporting someone who is earning and spending their money in your own local economy. And you are supporting exposure, right, for our kids and ourselves to what agriculture looks like how do we feed ourselves? This is something we do multiple times per day and we can't do without.
Yeah. So you've touched on this a little bit already. I'm really trying to understand how our food system is failing us and even harming us.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that a little more?
Yeah. Well, the failing us is that we are, as a population in the United States, we are not well. We are not well. We have micronutrient deficiencies. I think currently, the latest stats that I saw shows 98% of Americans are not getting the fiber that they like, the minimum daily recommended amount of fiber. So no wonder we have colon-based diseases and immune suppression issues, because we know, as you speak much about, our gut is related to everything else, especially our immune system function. So we are not well. We have a third of the adult population with obesity, and it's not okay to blame those who have obesity for having that, just as we don't have the same criticisms for people who have cancer. You don't sit there and point your finger at them and say, you should do better. That's not appropriate. It's the structure. So what are some of these structures? It's our it's economic access, it's our poverty rates. So why are we still having wages that are not livable wages for people to be able to purchase the kinds of foods that they need for healthy diets, and not end up being the buyers of the cheap foods that are actually supported by subsidies. So it's part of why, the white squishy bread that you can take a slice and turn it into a little ball. I'm sure none of you have done that. But there's a reason why those are so inexpensive, right? Because there's subsidies that are being paid to farmers that, if we could re-envision how those subsidies are paid, what if we paid those subsidies to all those biodiverse farmers, right? Pay them to protect the bees, pay them to protect us from flooding, which is what we're doing by maintaining soils and soil health, right? So pay them to protect our wellness by growing biodiverse foods that aren't, with some of the, for example, the herbicides, I mentioned it before, glyphosate scares me. Glyphosate has a patent on it as an antibiotic. So it's both an herbicide and an antibiotic. So what happens when we consume antibiotics? They shift our gut, gut microecology. And so, we want to watch out for things like this. And so these are some of the ways that, they're failing us, in terms of making, we're not necessarily being assured of healthy diets. And actually, even in the most latest nutrition guidance that came out from the USDA, that report, for the second time in the row, removed any and all mention of sustainability from it. So there's clearly some vested interests in maintaining the status quo. But what we know is that when we have more diverse diets, so, for example, we're eating legumes and we're eating, there's a categorization that the World Health Organization uses. It's called a dietary diversity score. And so the way that they look at things are based on, eggs, fish, so not our traditional 4 food groups, but they're looking at seeds, they're looking at legumes as a separate category, they're looking at things that are yellow and orange inside, and that's for, vitamin C and vitamin E. They're looking for other fruits, they're looking for other vegetables that are not yellow or orange inside. And meat is a category in there. But so are pulses, and eggs is considered a separate category. So if we start thinking about, eating very diverse, having that dietary diversity, then we need diverse producers. And so we'd end up either at the landscape scale or within an individual farming operation with that diverse system again. So it keeps going back to that theme.
That's really interesting, because you talk about that on a landscape scale all the way down to this micro farming scale. And I employ the same philosophy in my household and in my daily life. I try to rotate everything we eat, even down to cooking fats, even down to condiments, even down to the kind of sea salts I use. And once it becomes a habit, it's easy. It doesn't take any effort. I have a section in my pantry with my cooking fats. I have a section in my kitchen. I pull out the drawer with all of my salts, and just depending on what I'm eating it with, I try to rotate it. And we try not to eat anything really more than 2 or 3 times a week, like eggs.
Yeah.
But I had to learn all of this the hard way with both myself and my daughter, with food sensitivities, and which turned into severe gut irritation and long-term issues. But yes, thank you for explaining that, because it really trickles all the way down to our individual health and daily habits.
Yeah, it does.
Um, how does the US food system compare to that of other countries?
Yeah, that's a good question because I think that the easiest way to start is to start by, pointing out that we are more industrialized. And so, we have the big giant tractors and we have, those amber waves of grain, right? So we have cornfields as far as the eye can see. And we have, land access issues that are not unique to the United States, but, you can't have these giant farming operations unless they have access to giant, territories, so large swaths of land. And so it's very hard, so that structure is very different than what you see in a lot of other countries. So, I'll share from my own work. I went to Central Asia of all places, and so Kyrgyzstan, to be able to study a very different kind of agriculture, a smaller scale agriculture. So, for example, in Kyrgyzstan, 60% of fruits and vegetables are produced in front yards and backyards. If we look,
Wow.
if we look to Russia, 90% of front yards and backyards provide, 90% of vegetable production, so berries and fruit. Let me start over. 90% of our fruits, because there's another statistic with the veggies, but 90% of the fruit production in Russia, so comes from home gardens, the front yards and backyards. So I went there because they're us on the other side of the planet, right? So temperate, northern latitudes climate. So I had to go somewhere else to look at another model. And what we see in those areas, there are ways that they're different. So there's economic issues. There's higher poverty rates than here in the United States. And so that creates different kinds of food security issues. So for example, in Kyrgyzstan, anemia was a big problem. So that's an iron deficiency, but not just iron deficiency. If you aren't consuming some of those key micronutrients at the same time as your iron, then you can't absorb it well. So you can have vitamin C deficient anemia if you're not consuming that at the right time. But so there's different malnutrition issues. Here we have overnutrition issues in the United States. So again, high calorie, low micronutrient dense foods. And in other areas, you have target micronutrient deficiencies, but it tends to be around those more expensive foodstuffs, which are the meats, right? More so there. But the distribution there, everybody controls what they're growing. Here, very few people control what is being grown. The consolidation in our food system here in the United States is frightening. I would point folks to Phil Howard, a colleague of mine at Michigan State University, who writes about concentration in the food system, and all these little brands that we think we're supporting smaller companies in stores are actually, bought out by some of the larger companies. Actually, globally, the majority of our seeds are controlled by Bayer.
Oh, I would have said Monsanto.
They bought Monsanto. So,
Of course.
yeah, so actually Bayer Chemical controls the world's seed system. So they have the most concentration. There are some other big players, but if you look at, he has some wonderful infographics I'd encourage you all to explore, because the same consolidation has happened in the organic industry also. So, that kind of consolidation is very different here in the US food system than it is in many other places in the globe. So you really have more people who are at the micro business, small scale enterprise, and medium enterprises globally.
Here or in other countries?
Other countries. So here, that's a sector that was either taken over, right? So if we look through time, even just in the last, 50 years or so, the smaller, the more localized mills, the more local bakers, were bought out. Food hubs. Food hubs are not new. Essentially, we're trying to reestablish a structure to the food system that was essentially destroyed through consolidation here in the United States. So, there's some opportunities, and lots of folks are working on this. Trying to reestablish smaller scale and then this kind of medium scale, a more regional scale to our food system. So actually trying to invest in establishing small scale mills, trying to invest in, for example, alternative energy vehicles that are smaller for distribution routes, because a smaller scale farmer is not going to be able to fill a 40-ton 18-wheeler truck, right, with just carrots, but they could fill a smaller box truck with lots of different foodstuffs if there was somewhere locally to bring it to for resorting and being able to resell on the wholesale market or distribute more locally to growers. So that's a big way that we're different, is a lack of the small and medium-sized enterprises in the U.S.
This is so overwhelming, particularly for parents, when everybody wants to do the best for them kids and themselves. And so we think that many people, we can go out and just buy all organic, but we end up just buying organic junk food, just higher priced junk food. But on a bigger scale, what steps can we take to create change and make this difference in our lives? Because it's so overwhelming to take. I mean, this is my primary objective with Primafoodie, is to help create this change. But, one little person is not going to take on big ag and food lobby groups. So how can we all change this?
Yeah, well, I think you probably underestimate yourself, and I think we all underestimate ourselves and what we can do. So for those of us who are fortunate enough to have choices, because it really is a privilege to be able to walk into a grocery store and make choices, then I would really urge us all to, do as Nichole was describing about her own pantry, as many different kinds of foodstuffs that you can, buy and explore and enjoy. That means that by default at that landscape scale, you're going to be supporting more biodiverse farming operations. When you have choices, choose those that are foodstuffs that are from your region. And if you can't choose from your region, then, local ideally, then your region, and then move out because, we are concerned about things like food miles, the energy inputs that it takes to travel, for food to travel from, Florida all the way up to, wherever. That's something that we want to be thinking about. Seasonality, what's fresh right now. So when you're buying foods in season, you're more likely to be buying them from somebody who has less access to that whole giant infrastructure of those big 40-ton trucks that can then get them to a processing center that can then flash freeze them, that can then, or dry them or what have you. So if you're buying fresh and in season, then you're making a contribution. All things equal, if you have the ability to choose organic for all the reasons I mentioned before. And I try to suggest to parents to look at this book a colleague of mine, Michelle Perro, wrote. It's called What's Making Our Children Sick? And it's and this isn't to be a downer, a depressor, but it's really stories of. She's a pediatrician based in California, and she has devoted her career to looking at how food is actually making our children sick, but how food can also organically produced food that doesn't have these residues that I keep talking about, is something that we can do to help influence, especially the gut health of our children. Because remember, I mentioned that glyphosate also has a patent for being an antibiotic, which is concerning for those of us concerned about gut health. And then, another thing with parents is just try and try and try. Remember, I said the research shows it's up to 17 exposures to a food before it would become a food preference for a kid. So, cauliflower with, cheese if you do dairy on top, cauliflower, as, rice, as the, pizza crust, cauliflower in the stir fry, cauliflower in the, try it and just keep trying it. And because what we know is that kids all over the place eat fruits and veg. Just US kids don't.
Yeah. And I would add that kids and even adults are losing the actual taste of the food. Because when they buy, we know, those of us who shop at the farmer's market know that it is like a different product when you buy a carrot or a tomato or an orange from the farmer's market. It's a different thing. You can actually taste the food. And this goes with animal proteins as well. But I could go down a rabbit hole with that. Let's, I have one more question to ask
Sure.
you. Maybe two more. So you focused a lot of your work on finance for small farms and micro entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
As we live in a country fueled by these gargantuous organizations, how can we do our parts to get back to small? I think you just talked about that. Is there anything you would add to that?
Yeah, I think I didn't mention enough how important supporting your local farmers markets and food co-ops are, because co-ops they're cooperatives. They're a different form of business organization. And so, they, operate on profit sharing models. And, they're one of those, like, if grower encounters a challenge, your local food cooperative is more likely to say, hey, no problem, come back later when that's sorted, as opposed to completely canceling the contract and never working with them again, right? So you want to be looking for businesses that support the ethics that, resonate with you. So your local food cooperatives, and then also your farmers markets. And I know I myself have mentioned this a couple times, but it's a misconception that organic food costs more than their non-organic alternatives. When you start getting into the highly processed organic foods, yes. But if you're talking about the difference in price between an organic turnip and a regular turnip, trust me, there's not a big difference in that price. And, especially if you're substituting for, plant-based proteins, so higher in the legumes and complementary foods than, a hunk of meat, then you're also dealing with a cost difference there. And so there's a misconception that organic always costs more. And there's also a misconception that those who are being taken care of by the social safety net that we have here in the United States. And so that's through, unemployment benefits, and that's also through food assistance, SNAP benefits. The majority of farmers markets in the United States participate in a program. They can apply to participate in a program. So maybe if this isn't happening in your community, you could support them to look into it, but they're called double up food bucks. And so any SNAP benefits that somebody brings to a farmer's market, they're doubled in value. And so,
Wow.
Yep. And so that program, advocating for support support for Double Up Food Bucks for the SNAP benefits is so important, because not only are you supporting your local growers and farmers, you're also, supporting, those who have encountered a challenge and, are fortunate, we're fortunate in the United States that we've set up a system where we, provide that support through the supplemental nutrition benefits. And the same goes for those accessing through WIC benefits, which is women, infants, and children. So if we want to support children being exposed to, great foods, then, supporting your farmers market and supporting these policies that are around the SNAP benefits, Double Up Food Bucks, is really important. I think, again, paying living wages is a way that we can support food security. And I know that that's challenging. We have competing concerns for small and medium-sized business owners that can become more challenging, but it's something that I'm sure we can find a solution for. But then also, it's thinking about what kind of agricultural workplace. I know this seems like a big issue, and you asked me about what, kind of what can we be doing to support, smaller scale businesses. But it's thinking about, what kind of skills do people need if they're going to be supporting sustainable systems? And trust me, these are not the skills that the majority of high schools or vocational schools or even institutions of higher education are teaching when it comes to agriculture. And so it's really paying attention to, kind of what kind of jobs do we want to be training people for in the future? And are they learning about sustainability science, yes or no? And a lot of times the answer is no. So we have some, work to be doing there. Do you have a school gardening program at your school? Do people in your area know what a carrot looks like when it pulls out of the ground? What do the leaves look like? That type of thing. But it's really, I think the place to pay attention to and where we can have the most influence moving forward is really thinking about, in the United States, thinking about regional food systems and how do we support smaller and medium-sized businesses that are in that distribution component of the food system. So where are the food hubs? Where are the mills? Where are the trucking companies that hopefully are using alternative fueled vehicles, and how can we re-envision that? It's at our local planning commissions. We have ordinances in the US and homeowners associations that, you'd be in violation if you were growing a carrot because it grows to be higher than 2 feet, So, we have things that we can be working on locally that can be more supportive of sustainable food systems.
Dr. Currey, thank you so much for joining today. This is such I think we could go on for another half hour talking about this.
I'm game.
No. I've already kept you for longer than I promised. Are there any other resources you recommend if someone wants to learn more about this?
Yes, I have some that I think you'll enjoy. So one I just encountered recently, it's a website called Food Prints. So like a footprint, but instead food prints. And it talks about some of these issues and prints, like footprints.
Oh.
Yeah. So that's one that is taking this ecological and nutrition lens at food and trying to look at individual foodstuffs and how they impact the environment. So that's a great place. I've been sending my students there to check that out. There's a couple of podcasts that I listen to on a regular basis. So one is called the Nutrition Show.
I don't know that.
And the nutrition. Yeah, so that's Mary Purdy, and she is right now, she just had a really excellent episode on milks, like alternative milks and what the ecological impacts really are and the nutritional impacts of those different plant-based milks. The Food Sleuth. The Food Sleuth is another podcast. That's with Melinda Hemmelgarn. And, if you're interested in all those systems level approaches, but with the nutrition lens, then Melinda is definitely someone to listen to. Sharon Palmer, she's known as the plant-powered dietitian, and her research and advocacy and recipes all center around plant-based diets. And so I would encourage you to look at her website, because her recipes are really, focus on all of those components I mentioned, seasonal foods, complete proteins, more plant-based. So Sharon Palmer is a great place. And actually, we're so pleased. She's actually running a series of workshops here at Prescott College. So if you're interested in that too, I just want to mention, because they're open to everyone. So you don't have to, be a student or, have, lots of letters after your name to participate in it. And so if you look at Prescott.edu and then /culinary, Prescott.edu /culinary, that'll link to a series of nutrition and culinary workshops that we're running. So Sharon and I tag team, so I do the plants and she does the nutrition. So the one that is starting soon is on Pulses nutrition and culinary workshop, and we have one coming up on the Mediterranean diet. So between those folks, that'll get you in in the groove. I guess if I have time for one more, I'll mention the Beacons of Hope. Beacons of Hope. And the Beacons of Hope is an initiative that is trying to document case studies of farmers globally, who are transforming food systems. So you asked me, how is the US different from other places? There's a series of, I think it's 23 case studies, and some of those case studies were recently highlighted by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation in a series they're having, which is called Reimagined in America. And so that initiative, Reimagined in America, is really looking globally to see, like, oh my gosh, we have done a pretty good job of messing up our food systems and our health in the United States. So what are those lessons that we can learn from globally? So it's a really interesting webinar series that's on right now. So
I love it. I will be examining that more closely. This is something I've been working on for Primafoodie that I'm fascinated with, and just looking at other systems and seeing what is working. So I will sign off for now. Thank you again. I really appreciate it. It was great talking with you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And let me know how I can help, how I can be a partner to you in that effort, because that's a shared area of interest. So
thank you. I would love to. And if somebody wants to reach out to you, can I share your information?
Yes, please. So I'm easy to find. I'm robin.currey at prescott.edu. They say Prescott in these here parts, but it's spelled Prescott. So I welcome communication through that email. So yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye.